On a quiet Easter weekend in 2015, a young Virginia woman named Amanda Taylor committed an act so shocking that it would grip the nation's attention. Amanda was just 24 years old, a mother of two and a recent widow. Less than a year earlier, in August 2014, her husband Rex Taylor had died by suicide, hanging himself after a long struggle with drug addiction and depression. Rex's death devastated Amanda. He had been the love of her life. She often said she loved him more than the world, and losing him sent her into a spiral of grief, anger, and obsession. In her grief, Amanda began to cast about for someone to blame. Soon, she fixated on one person she held responsible for Rex's downward spiral, his own father, 59-year-old Charles Taylor, Amanda's father-in-law. In Amanda's mind, Charles was the reason Rex became addicted to drugs, the reason he lost control, and ultimately the reason Rex took his own life. Whether or not this was true didn't matter to Amanda. In her eyes, Charles had destroyed Rex, and she decided that he deserved to pay for it. She would become judge, jury, and executioner, a vigilante for the husband she had lost. This is the story of how that obsession led to a brutal murder and a strange, self-documented crime spree that shocked everyone who heard it. To those who knew Amanda before all this, the path she took would have been almost unimaginable. By most accounts, Amanda Barbara Nickel Taylor had been an ordinary young woman. She grew up in Virginia, got married young to Rex, and started a family. Together, they had two young children. But behind closed doors, Amanda and Rex shared some darker fascinations. Friends later revealed that the young couple had a morbid obsession with true crime and serial killers. They would stay up late discussing infamous murder cases, even bonding over an admiration for notorious criminals and mass murderers. It was an unusual hobby, but for them, it was almost like a fantasy escape. Still, nobody could have predicted that one day, Amanda would turn those dark interests into real violence. Rex's struggle with drugs had been a serious issue in the last years of his life. Amanda stood by him as he battled addiction, but it took a toll on both of them. According to Amanda, Rex's father Charles was part of the problem. She believed Charles had introduced Rex to drugs, or at least enabled his habit, a claim that people close to the family would later dispute. In reality, Charles Taylor was known by others as a decent man who had his own struggles. He had endured the pain of watching his son's life spiral out of control. And when Rex died, Charles was said to be heartbroken, but Amanda's grief warped into rage. She convinced herself that Charles was a villain who had effectively killed Rex by fueling his addiction. She started to fantasize about revenge. Over the months after Rex's death, this anger festered. Amanda became depressed and unstable. In late March 2015, just a week or so before Easter, she even suffered a breakdown while visiting Rex's grave on his birthday. She was so distraught that her mother called the police, and Amanda spent several days in a mental health facility to recover. Doctors released her after a short stay, thinking she was stable enough. But inside, Amanda's feelings of vengeance only grew stronger. She felt that no one understood her pain, and that justice had not been served for Rex's death. In her mind, justice meant making Charles suffer as she and Rex had suffered. By early April 2015, Amanda had gone from daydreaming about revenge to actively planning a murder. She reached out to a friend of hers, 32-year-old Sean Ball, to help her. Sean was an acquaintance who perhaps didn't know what he was signing up for, but Amanda was persuasive. She told Sean about her plan to kill Charles Taylor. It's possible she painted it as righteous retribution. After all, she truly believed Charles was responsible for Rex's demise. Sean agreed to join her, though his exact motivations remain unclear. He might have been swayed by loyalty, or curiosity, or simply found himself in over his head with a friend he wanted to help. Together, in the days leading up to Easter, they gathered the tools they would use to carry out the killing. They purchased an unmistakable weapon, a bayonet-style knife, the kind of long blade reminiscent of a military knife. Amanda chose that knife carefully. Later, she would tell investigators that she wanted something up close and personal. She wanted Charles to see that it was her who was killing him, not some anonymous gunman. A knife was intimate. and, in her mind, fitting for the personal nature of this murder. Sean, for his part, armed himself as well. He hid a heavy tire iron, essentially a crowbar, down his pants as they set off, and he also brought along several firearms, 2 pistols and a rifle, which were reportedly stolen from his own parents' house. This was not going to be a confrontation with any mercy or chance of escape for their target. They were going prepared for battle. The date was the 4th of April, 2015, the day before Easter Sunday, when Amanda and Sean climbed into his Jeep and drove to Charles Taylor's home. Charles lived in the Ellet area of Montgomery County, Virginia. It was a rural, quiet place, and that Saturday it would have been especially quiet, with families preparing for the holiday. Amanda knew that Charles would be home that evening. In fact, living with Charles in that house was his own elderly father, a man in his 80s named Alan, who was bedridden and needed care. Despite the familial estrangement since Rex's death, Amanda managed to arrive at Charles's doorstep without raising suspicion. Perhaps she had called ahead, or perhaps she just showed up. Given that Charles welcomed her in, it seems he didn't feel threatened by his daughter-in-law. Amanda had once been part of his family. She was the mother of Charles's grandchildren, after all. So he likely thought she was just visiting, maybe to talk or even to seek peace after months of hard feelings. If Charles harbored any guilt about Rex, he might have hoped this was a chance to reconcile. We can only speculate about what was running through Charles's mind as he led Amanda and her friend inside that evening. Inside the modest home, Charles sat down in the living room on his couch, and the 3 of them chatted for a short time. At first, the conversation was ordinary enough. But Amanda had a purpose that night, and before long she steered the conversation toward the topic of her late husband, Rex. Perhaps the air grew tense as she brought up her grievances. She later said that she wanted Charles to know why this was happening. She wanted him fully aware of the reason, to feel the weight of what she believed he had done. As the talk turned to Rex's suicide, any cordial pretense fell away. Amanda's voice must have quavered with anger and conviction. One can imagine Charles's confusion or defensiveness as his daughter-in-law started accusing him of terrible things, blaming him for his own son's death. In a flash, the confrontation turned violent. Amanda stood up, pulled out the bayonet knife she had hidden, and lunged at Charles. He had no time to react. She drove the blade into him, again and again, with all the pent-up fury she had been carrying since Rex died. Charles cried out and tried to fight back, grappling for the knife as his daughter-in-law rained blows on him. He might have screamed in pain and shock, struggling to understand why this was happening. As Charles reached up, possibly trying to grab Amanda's arms or shield himself, Sean Ball sprang into action as well. Sean pulled out the tire iron he had concealed and swung it with brute force at Charles's head. He struck Charles multiple times. Later, Sean admitted to hitting him around 5 or 6 times. The living room instantly became a scene of horror. Furniture knocked askew, blood spattering onto the couch and floor, the 59-year-old man overwhelmed by 2 attackers. But Amanda wasn't stopping. She was relentless, stabbing Charles over and over even as Sean's blows with the crowbar rained down. Charles Taylor, ambushed in his own home by people he thought he could trust, stood no chance. The attack was ferocious. By the time Amanda finally stepped back, panting from exertion, and the red haze of rage cleared, Charles lay motionless and dying. She had stabbed him 31 times in total. The wounds were everywhere. Chest, arms, neck, some so deep that the knife had gone completely through his neck and out the other side. 11 of those stab wounds, a medical examiner would later testify, could each have been fatal on their own. And if that weren't enough, Charles also suffered severe blunt force trauma to his head from Sean's tire iron swings. In mere minutes, the father of her late husband had been brutally executed. Charles likely died there on his couch, or shortly thereafter, succumbing to the massive blood loss and injuries. For Amanda, there was a grim satisfaction in that moment. She later described feeling a sense of relief once Charles was dead. This was what she had wanted for months, to punish him, to remove him from this world, because she felt he didn't deserve to be here anymore when her beloved Rex was gone. Standing over Charles's lifeless body, Amanda felt, in her own words, so much better. It was as if a weight had lifted off her shoulders. She even said she was happier than ever after killing him. The adrenaline coursing through her made her feel excited, even elated. She would shock investigators later by comparing the murder to an amusement park ride, saying it felt like her first roller coaster ride at an adventure park, a thrilling rush. It's a chilling insight into her state of mind. For Amanda, this wasn't a somber act of necessary evil. It was exhilarating. And in that excitement, Amanda did something that would earn her a notorious nickname in the press. She posed for a photo with her victim's body. Right there in the living room, with Charles's blood still fresh on her hands, Amanda handed Sean her phone, or perhaps Sean used his own phone, and had him snap a picture. In the photo, Amanda stands in front of Charles's corpse, holding the bloody bayonet knife and smirking. Her face shows something like pride, a look of triumph. It's an image almost too disturbing to fathom, a sort of trophy photo from a killer who wanted to brag about what she'd done. Sean captured this gruesome moment, likely stunned and unsure how to react as his friend beamed with a twisted happiness next to the man they had just murdered. With Charles dead and the deed done, one might expect panic or second thoughts, but Amanda remained startlingly composed and purposeful. She and Sean quickly rifled through Charles's belongings, taking some cash from his wallet. They would need money for what was to come next. Before fleeing, Amanda took one more step to buy some time. They spoke briefly to Charles's ailing father, Alan, who was bedridden in another room of the house. Alan was dependent on care and couldn't easily get up to see what had happened. Amanda and Sean called out to him that Charles had gotten hurt. Perhaps they claimed he had fallen or injured his leg, and that they were going to take him to the hospital. Imagine the cruel irony. The elderly man, unable to investigate for himself, had to trust Amanda as she lied to him about his own son, all while Charles's lifeless body was just yards away. Satisfied that Alan wouldn't raise immediate alarm, Amanda and Sean left the house. They left the front door closing on a nightmare scene: a dead father, a helpless grandfather, and blood on the walls on the eve of Easter Sunday. Amanda and Sean rushed out and climbed back into the Jeep, adrenaline still pumping. But Amanda's vendetta was not over, not in her mind. In fact, killing Charles seemed to have only whetted her appetite for violence. She later admitted that she had considered going on a crime spree after this first murder. For years, she and Rex had idly fantasized about how thrilling it would be to cut loose and wreak havoc, and now she had nothing holding her back. She had already crossed the point of no return. As they sped away from the scene, Amanda was actually elated and eager for more mayhem. Sean, on the other hand, was starting to feel the weight of what they had done. The reality of the blood and death was sinking in for him, and as the initial rush subsided, he grew nervous and reluctant. According to Amanda, as soon as Sean saw Charles dying back in that living room, he began to get cold feet about any further crimes. He had agreed to help with this murder, but he didn't share Amanda's newfound enthusiasm for killing. They were suddenly at odds. Amanda wanted to push forward into a twisted adventure of violence, and Sean wanted out. That night and the next day, the pair remained on the run. The murder of Charles Taylor was discovered relatively quickly. It's likely that by Easter morning, the 5th of April, 2015, police in Montgomery County were alerted. Perhaps Alan, the elderly father, realized something was terribly wrong when his son never came back. Or maybe other relatives showed up for Easter and found Charles dead. Additionally, Amanda did not exactly hide her crime. She was about to announce it to the world herself. So, by the time the authorities knew Charles was murdered, suspicion naturally fell on Amanda. She was the estranged daughter-in-law who had a known grudge because of Rex's suicide, and now she was nowhere to be found. Sean Ball was also missing. Very quickly, an all-points bulletin went out for Amanda Taylor and Sean Ball as suspects in the killing. Law enforcement began a manhunt, fearing that these two were armed and dangerous, which indeed they were. Meanwhile, as they drove southward, Amanda herself was actively drawing attention to her crime. Instead of laying low, she turned to social media to tell everyone what she had done and why. Using her smartphone, Amanda posted a series of updates on Facebook and Instagram that can only be described as confessions and taunts. In one post, she uploaded that grisly photo of herself standing over Charles's body with the bloody knife. She captioned it with a defiant message explaining her motive. "Everything I did was for the right reasons." Amanda wrote in a caption for a photo of a news article about the murder. She openly admitted, "I stabbed my father-in-law to death because he destroyed my husband with drugs and depression." She went on to say that she wasn't a perfect wife, but that this murder was one last good thing I could do for Rex. "I don't care what anyone thinks," she added. "I loved Rex more than the world. This was for you." The raw emotion and twisted justification in her words are chilling. She truly believed she had done something righteous and loving for her deceased husband. But Amanda didn't stop there. In another social media post that day, she posted a picture of herself with a handgun resting across her lap. In the caption, she addressed her own mother and her children. She essentially said her goodbyes, writing that it was about that time to end everything. Amanda instructed her mother to take care of her beautiful crazies, referring affectionately to the two young children she and Rex had together, saying, "I know you'll give them the life I just couldn't after everything." She then declared, in an almost poetic phrasing, that she was going to go find my husband in hell and finally be at peace. She ended that post by saying, "I'm finally going to be free." It was clear Amanda was planning to die, either by suicide or in a blaze of violence that would likely lead to her death. She had no intention of surrendering peacefully. In fact, she even dared the authorities to come after her, warning that if they kept hunting her, more will die. This was both a threat and a promise. She was prepared to kill again if it came to it. These social media messages were public, and they spread rapidly. Friends, family, and soon the police themselves saw Amanda's posts. In one sense, Amanda was making the investigators' job easier by confessing online and even giving hints of where she might be headed. Her photo on the Blue Ridge Parkway, for example. Law enforcement agencies were alarmed, knowing now that she was not only a murderer, but also potentially about to harm others or herself. They urgently tracked the pings from her phone and the tips coming in from anyone who saw her updates. The chase was on, across state lines, to stop Amanda before she could fulfill her threat of more violence. Amanda and Sean's journey took them into North Carolina. They had driven onto the scenic Blue Ridge Parkway, a long mountain road that stretches through the Appalachian Mountains, perhaps as a way to avoid major highways and police, or perhaps simply because they were roaming, considering where to go next. At one point during their flight, they pulled over at a scenic overlook. By now it was Easter Sunday, and the Blue Ridge Parkway would have had occasional tourists and travelers enjoying the spring views. Amanda spotted two young women at this particular stop, travelers on spring break, looking out over the mountains. In that moment, Amanda's homicidal urges surged. She thought these women would be perfect victims for the next step in her self-declared killing spree. They were alone, far from anyone else, possibly carrying money or valuables since they were traveling. She later recounted how she even chatted with the two briefly and learned they were just passing through. After the brief conversation, Amanda walked back to the Jeep and told Sean that they should rob and kill those two women. It was the kind of senseless, cold-blooded crime she had fantasized about, channeling the energy of her favorite serial killer stories. But Sean was horrified at the idea. He flat out refused. "I can't disappoint my mom anymore," he told Amanda, according to her recollection. In that instant, any remaining alliance between Amanda and Sean began to shatter. Sean's conscience was rearing its head. He couldn't bring himself to kill strangers for no reason. For Amanda, this was infuriating. She felt that Sean was ruining her plans she saw as her destiny now that she'd started with Charles. Over the next day or so, as they continued driving, Amanda's frustration with Sean grew into anger. He had helped her with the one killing she cared about, but now he was a burden, a hindrance. At some point on Sunday, the 5th of April, Amanda made a fateful decision. If Sean wouldn't join her in further violence, then she no longer needed Sean. In fact, perhaps she thought he might even turn on her or try to surrender, so she turned on him first. While they were still in the vicinity of the Blue Ridge Parkway near Asheville, North Carolina, Amanda took one of the guns, a revolver that Sean had obtained for her, and shot Sean Ball at close range. She later said she aimed at his face or neck. The bullet tore into Sean's throat. In an instant, the accomplice became another victim. Sean slumped over, severely wounded and bleeding profusely. Amanda left him there, either believing he was dead or simply not caring if he lived. She later coldly remarked that Sean had ruined her plans, as if that justified her attempt to execute her friend. Now alone, Amanda got back into the vehicle and sped off, leaving Sean for dead on the side of the road, in a remote area of the Blue Ridge Parkway. That Sunday evening, just after 7 p.m., a mysterious 911 call came into local authorities in North Carolina. A caller reported finding an injured, unresponsive man near milepost 386 on the Blue Ridge Parkway. Emergency responders rushed to the location and found Sean Ball clinging to life. He had been shot through the neck and was in critical condition, but miraculously, he was still alive. At first, the scene must have been puzzling. A lone man with a gunshot wound, no shooter in sight. Sean was rushed to a nearby hospital for life-saving treatment. It didn't take long, however, for investigators to connect the dots between this 911 call and the manhunt for Amanda Taylor. Reports of Amanda's social media threats and the murder in Virginia were already in circulation. Here was Sean Ball, the very accomplice named in those reports, found almost dead. The evidence, and later Amanda's own admission, made it clear that Amanda was the one who had shot him and left him there. Even as medics were treating Sean and law enforcement was piecing together what happened on the parkway, the dragnet was closing in on Amanda. The North Carolina State Highway Patrol had been alerted to be on the lookout for her vehicle, the Jeep. Sure enough, not long after the 911 call, troopers spotted Amanda's Jeep on Interstate 40, not far from Asheville. When they tried to pull her over, Amanda refused to stop, and a high-speed chase ensued. For 2 miles, she led the police on a pursuit down the interstate. But the authorities were ready to end this safely. They deployed spike strips across the highway, which punctured the Jeep's tires and forced Amanda to a halt. Surrounded by armed officers, Amanda was taken into custody. This was the dramatic end to her brief but bloody run. There was no final shootout, no suicide by cop, just a young woman surrendering on the side of a highway after committing unspeakable acts. When police arrested Amanda, they found a woman who was eerily calm and even cheerful, given what had happened. An officer later noted that she was surprisingly coherent and pleasant during their interactions, not at all the wild, deranged figure one might expect. Amanda herself had essentially accomplished what she set out to do, at least the part she cared about most, and she seemed content. In fact, over the next few days as she was held in jail, she spoke openly with investigators and even gave a media interview by phone, showing very little remorse. She confessed readily to stabbing Charles Taylor and also to shooting Sean. She reiterated again and again that in her mind she had done nothing wrong morally. "I'm not evil," she insisted in one interview. "I didn't go kill random people. I killed somebody who deserved it." To Amanda, this was revenge, not a crime. She felt justified. She described how relieved she felt after killing Charles, how it had lifted her depression and anger, making her happier than ever. She even admitted that she was proud of what she had done. Amanda recounted to a reporter how she saw news stories online naming her and Sean as wanted fugitives, and rather than feeling fear, she felt excited. It thrilled her that she had finally done it. She had finally carried out the act she had fantasized about. When asked if she knew it was wrong to kill, Amanda acknowledged, "I know it's wrong. I know it's not right to go around killing people." But then she tempered that by saying it was something she chose to do to feel better, and that while she felt bad for the impact on her family, indeed, she had effectively orphaned her own children and devastated Charles's family, she didn't actually regret the act itself. She didn't view it as truly wrong in her personal moral code. It was a chilling, matter-of-fact justification from a young woman who had embraced murder as a form of personal justice. After her arrest in North Carolina, Amanda was extradited back to Virginia to face charges for the murder of Charles Taylor. Sean Ball, who miraculously survived the gunshot wound, spent about a week in the hospital, recovering before he too was taken into custody. Both Amanda and Sean were charged initially with second-degree murder in Virginia, but the gravity and premeditation of the crime would soon see Amanda's charge elevated to first-degree murder. The evidence against her was overwhelming. Not only did the police have the physical evidence from the crime scene and her weapons, but Amanda had literally documented her guilt across the internet. In addition, she gave detailed confessions to the police and media. In one of her statements to investigators, she vividly described the murder and even boasted that she chose a knife instead of a gun because she wanted to look Charles in the eyes and make sure he knew it was her killing him. She wanted it to be up close and personal. All of these statements would be used against her in court. It's no surprise that when Amanda Taylor went to trial later in 2015, the outcome was a foregone conclusion. During her trial, which took place in Montgomery County, the courtroom heard disturbing testimony about the killing. The medical examiner detailed the 31 stab wounds and blunt force injuries Charles sustained. The prosecution even presented that awful selfie photo of Amanda posing with Charles's body, the bloody knife in her hand, and a triumphant smirk on her face. That image, more than perhaps any words, showed the jury the chilling reality of Amanda's mindset. There was debate at trial about who exactly took the photo, whether Amanda took it herself or Sean took it for her. But the detail hardly mattered to the outcome. Amanda's own words were perhaps the most damning of all. Jurors heard how she had compared the thrill of killing to a roller coaster ride and how she expressed joy and pride afterward. They learned how she had publicly confessed on Facebook and Instagram, leaving a trail of evidence a mile long. Amanda's defense team had little to work with. It's possible they considered an insanity defense or argued she had a diminished mental state due to her grief. But ultimately, the calculated nature of her actions, buying a knife, recruiting an accomplice, traveling to the victim's home, underscored that this was premeditated murder. It took the jury less than 25 minutes of deliberation to find her guilty of first-degree murder. That is virtually no time at all. It means that not a single juror had any reasonable doubt about what happened, or any sympathy that could sway them away from a guilty verdict. In Virginia, a first-degree murder conviction can carry a heavy sentence, up to life in prison. And that is exactly what Amanda Taylor received. On the very day she was found guilty, the 12th of November, 2015, the judge sentenced her to life in prison, without the possibility of parole. Amanda, just 25 years old by then, would spend the rest of her natural life behind bars. When the sentence was announced, there was little surprise. This was a crime so cold-blooded and so openly confessed that leniency was out of the question. Amanda herself did not appear to show much remorse even at sentencing. For the family of Charles Taylor, there was at least some sense that justice had been served in a court of law, even though it could never bring Charles back or undo the trauma of what happened. As for Sean Ball, the accomplice who narrowly survived becoming a victim himself, he eventually pleaded guilty to his role in Charles's murder. In 2016, Sean was sentenced to 60 years in prison, with some portions suspended. In effect, he is expected to serve over 40 years behind bars. By the time he ever gets out, if he does, he will be an old man. Sean's decision to join Amanda on that fateful night cost him almost everything as well. And what about Amanda Taylor today? She remains incarcerated, serving her life sentence in a Virginia prison. Now, in her early 30s, she wakes up every day behind the razor wire fences of a maximum security facility for women. She has no chance of freedom. Reports indicate she is held at the Fluvanna Correctional Center for Women in Troy, Virginia, the place where the state houses many of its female inmates with long sentences. She did appeal her conviction, but the appeals court upheld the life sentence, seeing no reason to overturn such a straightforward case. Amanda's 2 children are growing up without their mother, and of course without their father, Rex, who died. In one tragic sweep, those kids lost both parents, one to suicide, one to prison, and their grandfather as well. It's a heartbreaking legacy of this crime that is sometimes overlooked. Amanda's actions didn't just take Charles's life, they destroyed her own family too. Charles Taylor lost his life. Alan Taylor lost his son, and effectively his granddaughter-in-law, to prison. And 2 little children lost their mom and their beloved grandpa in one fell swoop. Amanda's story has since been featured in true crime shows and news articles, often under the moniker the selfie killer, due to that infamous photo she took with her victim. People remain fascinated and horrified by how a seemingly average young woman became so consumed by vengeance that she documented her own brutal crime on social media for all to see. For many, it's a cautionary tale about the dark places unchecked grief and rage can lead to. Amanda herself, in interviews from prison, still acknowledges that she did what she set out to do and doesn't seem to regret killing Charles. She has, however, expressed some regret for how her actions affected her loved ones, especially her children, who will grow up knowing their mother is a convicted murderer. In the end, the case of Amanda Taylor and the murder of Charles Taylor is a stark and sobering story. It's the tale of a woman who convinced herself that vengeance was justice, that killing an evil man would heal her own pain. Instead, it led to even more tragedy. She sought to solve her hurt through violence, and in doing so became the very thing she once only read about in true crime stories, a killer in her own right. It's a serious and saddening story, one that reminds us that real-life crime is not glamorous or cool, but devastating for everyone involved. Amanda's life now consists of concrete walls and steel bars, and Charles Taylor's life is gone forever. No one really won in this scenario. It was loss and destruction on all sides. As you reflect on this story, you can't help but think of the many lives unraveled by that single act on the 4th of April, 2015. A daughter-in-law's obsession with vigilante justice left a family shattered and a community in shock. And even now, years later, the name Amanda Taylor serves as a grim example of how far misplaced anger and a thirst for revenge can drive someone down a path of no return.